The Renters' Rights Bill is not only going to change all the rules for landlords, but it's going to give your local council vast powers to investigate breaches of the rules, and not just the renters' rights rules, but rules and other bits of legislation as well. They'll have the right to seize documents, ask for documents, and enter premises with and without a warrant. And if you're a landlord or a letting agent, or someone who provides services to a landlord or letting agent, so for instance, a property portal, property technology, prop tech, banks, accountants, client money protection schemes, did you know that the council has the right to ask you to provide information and documentation? And it's also an offence not to comply. What's more, councils will have a positive duty to enforce many of the provisions in the Renters' Rights Bill. And I don't know why more people aren't talking about this, because it's a big deal. And in this video, I go through the new rights of investigation of local housing authorities or councils, so you can understand what powers your council will have when the Renters' Rights Act comes into force later this year in 2025. And who am I? I'm Suzanne Smith, lawyer turned landlord, and I run the independentlandlord.com website and this YouTube channel to bring landlords, letting agents, and other property businesses reliable information. You can sign up for my free weekly newsletter at theindependentlandlord.com/subscribe. And if you'd like to read more detail on the new investigatory powers of councils in the Renters' Rights Bill, check out this blog post here, theindependentlandlord.com/renters-rights-enforcement. Let's get started with the right of councils to demand documents from a relevant person. A local housing authority, which I'll call a council because it's easier to say, can ask a wide range of relevant persons for any purposes connected with the council's function under this set of legislation that I'm showing you now. And you can see that it includes the assured tenancy rules in the Housing Act 1988, database breaches, rental discrimination rules, so that's no kids and no DSS, and letting agent fees and banning orders. So, who's a relevant person? Well, it includes landlord, freeholder, letting agent, property manager, managing agent, people who provide or manage serviced accommodation, advertisers, and the property portals like Rightmove, and it requires them to produce the documents if the council serves a notice on them. And it will be an offence not to comply or to give false or misleading information, either deliberately or recklessly. Councils also have the right to demand documents from anyone if the council officer reasonably suspects that there's been a breach of or an offence relating to rented accommodation legislation. And so long as it's for a permitted purpose and they're there to investigate whether a breach of an offence under the legislation or to decide what the penalty will be. So this will cover anyone who might have evidence, such as referencing companies, insurance brokers, neighbours, and even builders. And as I mentioned, all the prop tech companies and all of these people, even if they're not involved in listing or marketing a property for let. And what is this rented accommodation legislation? Well, it's similar to the previous list, but it also includes those parts of the Housing Act 2004 that cover HHSRS, that's the hazards, HMO licensing and selective licensing. And for more detail, you can look at my blog post, independentlandlord.com/renters-rights-enforcement. Now I'm going to talk about the council's right of entry into business premises and suspected residential tenancies with and without a warrant. Let's start with without a warrant. So, local authorities will have a right to enter business premises at any reasonable time without a warrant if they reasonably believe that the premises are occupied by a relevant person, and it's the same relevant person I mentioned before, and involved in a rental sector business. And also, they need to consider it necessary to enter the premises in order to require the production of or even seize documents to see if there's been compliance with this rented accommodation legislation. And where a council officer reasonably suspects there's been a breach or an offence under the rented accommodation legislation. So the rented accommodation list is the same as their right to require documents from any person, which I explained. And the rental sector business includes letting agents, property managers, agents for serviced accommodation, as well as the business premises of landlords. The offices will have to go at reasonable hours, so I would say that's working hours, and give a notice to anyone present and show the officer's identity. Local authorities can also ask a magistrate for a warrant, and if they do this, they'll then have the right to use reasonable force in entering into the premises. But to get a warrant, they'll need to fill a list of conditions that you can find in my blog post. And if the council seizes documents when it's doing the raid, they'll need to give access for copying or provide copies, but they can charge a reasonable cost. So the council can enter into a residential property, so it's not business premises, which they suspect is being let, but which isn't on the database, or if they believe that the database is false. And they can also check if there's a breach of the Protection from Eviction Act 1977. And so the local authority officer can either go with or without a warrant. More details in my blog post. So that's a lot of law. But what does this mean for landlords and property businesses? Well, councils will have extensive powers to gather evidence, even without a warrant, and they'll be able to look for breaches of many laws and can even check with your builder or your bank and ask them to produce documents. And they can also impose huge fines and penalties for landlords. And you can see my earlier YouTube video about this. They can go up to £40,000. So we need to understand these rules to make sure we comply. And I make it easy with this free training course on YouTube, Renters' Rights Explained. And to keep up to date, subscribe to my free weekly newsletter here. And please give this video a thumbs up if you got this far and you found it useful. See you soon.